I was a real estate developer for about 20 years, which is a highly entrepreneurial business. Did about 2,500 projects all over the world, and ended up with one of the most complex tax returns, I'm told, in the United States because of all these separate legal entities. So that was a relatively entrepreneurial business, but I got out of real estate and had to figure out what am I going to do with my next life. And I started starting businesses and backing entrepreneurs and feeling like, gosh, this is a whole lot like real estate development to back entrepreneurs. So when you think about topics to talk to entrepreneurs about, culture is one of the last ones you typically think about because you're in the business of getting something started. It's chaotic. The last thing you're thinking about is culture building. I mean, it's just the most irrelevant topic you could possibly have. And I'm going to try to convince you that it's not as irrelevant as you think. I was teaching a similar kind of course a few years back, and I asked, I cold called on one of the entrepreneurs in the audience and asked him about culture, and he said, "We don't have any culture in our business." I said, "So we don't need no stinking culture, right?" Well, you have a culture. When you've decided you don't have a culture, you've got one. There is no way to, it's like air. You've got a culture, and so the question is, do you want to influence it or not? Do you really want to have a hand in shaping it or not? You are going to have it either inadvertently or with some planning and some forethought. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. I've got kind of my notes. So in investing in a lot of businesses, by the way, I've bought about 75 companies and started a bunch of them. I am on my third startup airline, to show you how stupid I really am. And I'm actually working with Kirk Hawkins up here on developing a plane. I mean, it is going from bad to worse here. No, Kirk has a really interesting idea. If anybody talk about a really cool entrepreneurial idea, he's got it. So we're just starting our newest one. We've just announced it in Brazil. So we're starting a new Brazilian airline. I'm the vice chairman at JetBlue Airways. If anybody in here flown JetBlue? Oh, good. Good. Well, I should give you free tickets or something for showing up here. So this idea about why do early stage businesses fail? I think the classical answer is their context. All of them experience these three things: uncertainty, scarcity, and dynamism. And they're all operating in that kind of an environment. So they're all dealing with these sorts of things, and there's nothing that feels like it has anything to do with culture there. Well, there's a guy by the name of Ichak Adizes who wrote a book a number of years ago. He's a professor at UCLA called Corporate Life Cycles, where he was sort of looking at what happens to companies as they progress, as they grow. And so a lot of you are starting way down here in your entrepreneurial efforts, where you're thinking about an idea, starting to talk to investors, putting together a business plan, all the way through the time that you're starting to develop a project or a product, do beta testing, all the way through. And finally, entrepreneurs kind of get businesses often through prime, where they really have systems up and running and the business is approaching stability. So why do they fail? What you want to do is obviously extend the period of prime or stability for a business and never get to those later stages of business. Now we could spend a lot of time and kind of identify what businesses are in various stages that we know about. It's kind of an interesting and fun thing to do. But here are the most common causes of failure in the entrepreneurial stages. I think everybody would have named liquidity. The 7 great lessons of highly effective entrepreneurs basically are don't run out of cash. That's the main thing they say. Illiquidity, not having enough capital to get things done is the number one cause. The second one is that they don't make the good hire-fire decisions. They don't hire carefully enough, and they don't fire quickly enough, and they don't get the right team together. The third one is culture. Then the fourth one that you realize is dealing with the founder. I know that's not anything that all of you budding entrepreneurs want to hear, but oftentimes the founder is a problem. In getting to the next stage, something almost always needs to be done. And then the final one is adjusting the offering. something like 97% of all successful entrepreneurial ventures have a different product or service in the end than the one that they had in their early stage business plan. I mean, it's extraordinary how much morphing needs to go on to get to a business that is really at its prime. So these are kind of the reasons. Well, what we're going to talk today about is this middle one, this culture one that we kind of think of as, the least hard edge, the fuzziest. So, Wikia's culture. You heard somebody talk this morning about Wikia. What is Wikia's culture? Can you tell from... We sat there for an hour with the guy who's running it. Yeah. Yeah, they love what they do. There's a lot of passion around the product. What other things do you pick up? Yeah.
It seems to convey that it's okay to fail, and that fail is just a way to discover new successes.
High tolerance for failure, experimentation, kind of sloppiness, chaos. They celebrate chaotic activity, Yeah.
Be open and focused.
Yeah. Very much openness, transparency, around what they do. Other characteristics, yeah? High degree of collaboration both internally and an expectation of the market that is the nature of human beings, that they enjoy collaboration. Well, we could go on, but here are the ones that I wrote down. Here is Wikia's culture. Now, how many of you in here are going to be applying to Gill? Now, why not? Now, it could be just because you have your own ventures going. But let's say you're a second-year MBA student. You're looking for a job. Would this appeal to you or not? We could talk about this for a while or why not, but I want to get through these slides. So we'll just have you think about that. But there's often a question of fit. You've read this book, Blink, about sort of how we thin slice and we go in, and very quickly we're able to pick up whether or not we fit, whether or not we like the culture, we like the spirit of the enterprise that's going on there. And people tend to congregate around these values that make up a culture. So he, I think, is probably the embodiment of that culture there. So I'd like you to take a few minutes and think about what is the culture of your business. And let's take 2 or 3 minutes and just pair up and talk with, however you can, and just describe in a few words what is the culture of your enterprise. Just take a practice run at this. How many of you think you could, in 6 words, describe your partner's culture? How many of you think you could do your own culture in 6 words? Well, let me give you that as an assignment to think about that. There's a really fun story. That Ernest Hemingway was asked to write the shortest short story, a 6-word short story. And that has spawned this whole idea that you see around of writing a 6-word memoir. So to write your own memoir in 6 words. It's also a very valuable thing to write your culture down, to capture your culture in 6 words. Why in 6 words? By the way, there's nothing magical about 6 words, but why that general notion? Any reason for that?
That's all people can remember.
It's about the maximum of what people can remember. None of you could remember. There wasn't anybody that said, I know all 6 of the things, or I know, whatever they said. It really is kind of at the limit of what we can remember. So there's kind of a good energy that gets around limiting things like that. So here's some 6-word memoirs, and I would bet you that any of you could take almost any of these memoirs and write a great story. I mean, this captures a whole lot of the pathos of the activities of a person's life. Here's another group, just to give you a feeling. And who would have thought you could capture so much of a life? I like that MBA, CPA, JD, or NBP, IPO. I mean, I know that guy, or failed SAT, lost scholarship. I know that guy. And I actually know that last woman. It's not my wife. But you kind of get the idea that there is something powerful about a culture that gets captured in a few images, a few words, because it can be remembered and bought into. And you saw that sitting in on that top, we kind of captured, as a group, what the culture was at Wikia. And I bet you that that's something that Gil would be relatively comfortable with. So your culture in 6 words, think about that. So I want to give you a couple of things here that may be tools for you. This is kind of a map for building a great culture. It may seem irrelevant to you at this stage, but if you want to extend the stages before your enterprise sort of starts to decline, if you want to extend it, you really want to think about culture building. Not doing it will cause you to fail in ways that you'll wonder what happened when the wheels come off. So here's a map. Some of you who've had me in class know that this is my favorite map for running and building a business. This comes from Marvin Bower. Anybody know who Marvin Bower is?
McKinsey.
Yeah. He was the founder of McKinsey. He was also a lawyer with Jones Day Revis and Pogue, one of the 2 or 3 largest law firms in the world. So he's a multi-talented guy. And basically his map was that you've got to get alignment. You've got to have perfect alignment between these 5 characters. And you put different words on. In fact, his top word he called the philosophy. You've got to have a philosophy that really drives you, which never changes. And that's why, and it's made up of a couple of key values. So that's why it's small up at the top of the triangle. And that will drive an objective or a couple of objectives, which then will generate your strategy. Your tactics will have many more efforts. And then finally, metrics or controls can change all the time. But it's getting alignment in all of those things that is the map for creating a great culture. So let's talk a little bit about each of these as we kind of go down. First thing is this idea of values. Values being observable. You know, sometimes when you ask entrepreneurs what their values are, they say things like integrity, honesty, forthrightness. Those are virtues. So I want to make a distinction between virtues and values. Values are where you spend your time, your money, and your mind share. So one of the great value statements that a company has is its budget. A budget is a value statement because that says how much are we going to spend on R&D? How much are we going to spend on salaries? How are we going to do this? So these are values. So what really drives your values in your enterprise? And think that one through pretty carefully. Here are where you find some real value conflicts if you don't think about it. I lived in a business for a long time where we were a grow fast business. We were all about growth. We could have cared less about profits. We were all about the balance sheet. We were building as big a balance sheet as we could. To heck with the profits. It just didn't matter. So we were building and building and building and building and growing. Well, there came a time when it was a problem not to have profits. We could not turn the ship because our values, our systems, our compensation, everything that we did was around starting new projects. All of the energy, all the personnel, everybody was about starting new projects. You see a lot of conflict in enterprises between this, is it customers or employees? Or customers or shareholders? Or shareholders or employees? When there's tension, who do you really spend time with? I saw the best example, the guy that I worked with when I first went to work out of business school is a fellow by the name of Trammell Crow, who's a big real estate developer. He owned the Dallas Merchandise Mart. Any of you know? On Stemmons Freeway there, it's about a 7 million square foot wholesale merchandise mart. So buyers come in there and examine goods. And there was a big buyer that came through the turnstile there, and a woman was checking IDs that had worked for Trammell for many, many years. And this guy he didn't have his ID with him, and so he became really abusive with this older woman and just said, "Do you know who I am?" and just started really kind of cursing at her and everything. Trammell cut a view of it out of the corner of his eye, and he walked over there and took the fellow by his arm and said, "I'm sorry, we do not treat employees of the Dallas Market Center this way. You'll have to leave." And he walked this important buyer to the front door and out. How long do you think it was before that story got around to all of the employees in that enterprise? It was within the hour that Trammell had walked over and protected an employee. Now, I'm not saying that's the right value, necessarily. It's just he made very clear that his job was going to be to take care of his employees, that his employees would then take care of customers, and that therefore the business would work well and the shareholders would be taken care of. So that was his priority. But a lot of times you get people where it's unclear what the order of priority is there. Well, you can see tenure and merit. A lot of times you see enterprises that who's here the longest gets the promotion, or inside versus outside hires, power versus competence. Does the best idea win, or does the most powerful person's idea win? These are all values things. This is all part of your culture. And the wheels come off in enterprises if you don't have alignment with these values. If you aren't clear about these values and get them captured in a few words. So the second thing then is objectives. And take a second here on objectives. My favorite objective of all time is Pepsi's. This was from 20 years back. Pepsi's objective, corporate objective, was beat Coke. Two syllables. Not even just 2 words. 2 one-syllable words. Beat Coke. That inspired PepsiCo for 20 years. And I actually was teaching this to a group of YPO executives, and the guy said that he went over to his brother-in-law's house, who was a warehouseman for Pepsi, to a barbecue, and somebody had brought Coca-Cola products. And he wouldn't serve them. He went down to the local grocery store, bought Pepsi products, and replaced them. So that people were using the Pepsi products. That's how powerful this was. It got all the way through the organization that we're about being. Well, in 2006, guess what? Pepsi beat Coke. And they did it through a bunch of strategies and a bunch of tactics and controls and measurements and celebration, but they made their objective. So here's the new Pepsi goal. It's a little more complex, a little more complicated, a few more words, but it's also a pretty clear one. It is to be the model to the world of how you operate in a global environment. This is this new woman CEO, and that's how she's articulated what Pepsi's about. Well, you all know the JFK, when land a man on the moon, bring him back safely within the decade. There's a clear moonshot kind of a goal that inspires people. And then finally, my favorite one of all time is Winston Churchill. In 1940, this is 3 days after the Germans crossed the Meuse River. Winston Churchill was on his way here with Neville Chamberlain and Clement Attlee to visit Parliament. And this is where he delivered that famous blood, toil, tears, and sweat speech. And there was a 43-word paragraph in a very short speech. By the way, nobody really applauded for Churchill. They gave huge applause to Neville Chamberlain, and Churchill gave this. And in 43 words, 5 of them are the word victory. Is it at all unclear what the objective of Churchill was? And what was Churchill's sign during World War II? Exactly. I mean, he made it absolutely clear what he was about, what the objective was. Nobody could forget it. He was the embodiment of that objective. And so having a clear objective is the next thing. And that's got to align with your values. So it's just your values drive what it is you're trying to achieve. This is kind of the what is winning question. This is one of the most powerful questions as an entrepreneur you can ask us. Envision winning. When I was running companies actively, I used to write the article about our company as if I were looking back 5 years. Say, such and such was successful because they did the following things. And here's what success was. They achieved $100 million in sales in a faster time. And just describe it. Envision it. Write it out. So then strategy is the next thing that you do as you develop. And this is kind of where the overlap comes between top management and middle management. Middle management has to understand and participate in the development of strategy. They have to own the strategy, and then they have to execute it. And I think the top management is responsible for thinking through values, objectives, and participating in the development of strategy. So you kind of answer these questions as you go down through to get alignment. So if you get perfect alignment on these things, you have this thing that is called trust, which is really the lubricant of getting enterprises so they can sustain themselves, so they can last. So I want to spend some time on what seems like a really soft, fuzzy notion, this idea of trust. as a culture carrier. But just there's a Harris poll done in 2005 of sort of how many people really trust these various enterprises. My guess is it's quite a bit higher in entrepreneurial enterprises, but I'd be surprised if it's 50% or more. There's very little that people really trust and have really bought into. So what is the nature of trust? I think one of the best way, just back to our chart here, one of the best ways to think about that is to think about this question: who do you trust? So let me just pose that to you. Who do you trust? I mean, you can see back here that it's certainly not the political parties or big companies or media or the government or used car salesmen or... So who do you trust? Yeah. Family. Why do you trust family?
I have trust in faith, but I have faith that they have my best interests at heart.
Yeah, they're looking out for you. They're not going to kind of screw you over or take advantage of you or do something that's not in your interest. Not going to do something behind your back. And which family member do you trust most? Your dog. They're clearly the most predictable. You can trust them to make a mess. You can trust them to do a bunch of things. You know, usually when I talk to people about this, it's mom. You know? I mean, your mom is just there forever for you. You know, you completely trust your mom. So the next question is... this is really the idea, is that their character is high character. They're looking out after you. Competence is the next thing we look at. In fact, I don't know if I put this slide here. When I often ask people, would you trust your mom to fly you to New York in a 747? Do you really trust your mom? You don't really trust your mom for everything, do you? And that kind of gets back to this idea. I mean, character is not enough. You've got to have competence. You've got to have ability to deliver. And that's really not even enough. You really have to have a power or an authority or a means to deliver. And the way I generally illustrate this is by saying that one of my partners is an attorney. He's a very capable attorney. And I've told him several times, I'd really prefer not to pay taxes this year. I mean, it'd really be nice. It'd be a good thing if you just did this. You're a capable guy. You've got high character. You're very competent. Just, now deliver on this thing. Well, that would be a foolish trust because he doesn't have the authority. He doesn't have the power to make this happen. So really you have to have all three of these things: to be trustworthy or to trust in another. And to have a culture of trust, all three of these things have to be present. So you have to have high character people with domain expertise and competence, and they have to be empowered. You have to have alignment of power, ability to deliver. Otherwise, you have lower trust than you need to build a high-quality enterprise. And ultimately, the wheels will come off before you get all the way up to stability. So I just want to make the point that I think if you'll think about trust this way, you'll see that it's really a pretty hard-edged, sticky kind of a notion. And it is vital. It is more than any other thing I can think of vital in a crisis. And by that I mean I've been with a bunch of businesses. I've taken a couple of businesses through Chapter 11 and back out the other side. I've taken several through workouts and really tough turnarounds where it's not just a turnaround where you're selling off assets and paying off as many creditors as you can, where you really want to have a viable athlete when you're done with the whole thing. Trust is the medium of exchange. It's the only way. Suppliers have to trust you. Employees have to trust you. Your investors have to trust you. The marketplace, your customers. I mean, trust is really how you get through these type of things. So when you say entrepreneurial activity is a high-risk effort and they fail, 9 out of 10 fail. 75% don't make it to an up round, or get bought by a strategic buyer. So it's a high-risk enterprise. Well, what gets you through that highest risk part is often having a culture of trust, having put together the right team that trusts one another and can see themselves through the time. So here are the three things. Just a quick comment here is we will forgive people who don't deliver if they're unempowered. We don't forgive people who violate our trust because of character flaw, who aren't looking out for our interests, who lie to us, who betray us. So when you think about these three components, think about if you're going to violate one of them, make sure it's one where you just didn't have the authority to deliver. You'll get forgiveness and can survive it. So think of trustworthiness as part of your brand. And we won't take the time here. I mean, another interesting exercise for people who are starting and running companies is to think about your brand. You're all creating something or developing something or selling something. What is your brand? In other words, what are you promising to the market? What can the market count on you? What can your employees count on you to be? If you take these automobile brands, here, do you have an idea when you look at those brands? Do they say something to you that's unique or different? Generally do. I think for most of us, these are brands that mean something, and they have taglines that try to capture. They want you to believe certain things about the brands, and I think for the most part, we kind of trust these brands to be these things. So, to continue on here on trust as this medium of exchange for building a culture, I want to introduce you to three kinds of trust. Talk about a few more things, and then I want to wrap up with an exercise here where you're going to try to evaluate your own enterprise, whether it's a high, medium, or low trust enterprise, by answering 10 questions. So that's where we're headed with this. But now just a few more minutes on what is trust. First of all, there's this reciprocal trust where you're trusting each other. This is the highest form of it's like a relay race. You know, where runners in a relay race pass the baton to each other, and the time of the relay team is always faster than a high school relay team. A high school 440 relay team will run the 440 faster than the Olympic gold medalist. Why? Because they are working together. They're trusting each other. They're passing the baton. They've got their gun, and they're young, and they're not running as far. But that's kind of a reciprocal trust. You find that in partnerships and families. And in entrepreneurial enterprises, this is really the best kind of trust to have. Particularly in startup stages, having a reciprocal trust is the best form. You then have representative trust. This is the kind of trust you've got with your doctor or with your accountant or your lawyers or whatever, where really it's uneven. You know, they're just representing you. All they're trusting you to do is give them information, accurate information. That's the only thing you have to do. And then you're trusting them to make the diagnosis, to do the operation, to file your tax returns, to develop documents. So that's representative trust, and we see a lot of that in business. And then the final is counterfeit trust, where you're dealing with coincident interests. This is the most dangerous kind of trust, and it's the kind of trust that you find most often in business, where really you're just saying, you know, it's in your interest and my interest, therefore we can trust each other to both be selfish. You know, we're like mafia dons. We're making a deal, you know, and we know that we won't be able to trust each other beyond acting in our self-interest, but that's the only kind of trust that we can have. So these are kind of the three kinds of trust that you run into commercially. So you have high, medium, and low trust organizations that really relate to this kind of these motivators. And I won't spend much time on this, but if you really think about it, these are the only 5 things that motivate people in your organization or motivate you. And I've thought about this for 40 years now and tried to find something that doesn't fit in one of these categories. I think we all are motivated. You know, if somebody puts a gun to your head and says do something, you're motivated to do it. That's called force, you know, or maybe fear. So business is, they always say business runs by fear and greed. Most businesses operate out of fear and greed. Most families operate out of a sense of duty and love. And if you array various organizations across this, you can kind of see, well, prisons, how long do you think people behave in prisons if they don't, if the actual motivator isn't right there? It doesn't last very long. And yet in families, you can remove all external motivators and the culture will maintain. There's just such a high trust, there's high reciprocal trust that the culture is so powerful that you don't have to have extrinsic motivators. So I think the idea in an entrepreneurial organization is to try to move yourself up this motivational scale so that people are doing things more for the reasons they do in foundations, the military, churches, families, high-level partnerships, etc. So let's look at a couple of much-studied cultures here. These are bigger companies, and we don't study a lot of the small ones, but these are three of the most famous companies that have been studied. HP Way. We've all read about, what makes... And notice, on all these, there'll be three things, three values that drive. So it's respect for others, sense of community, hard work. That's the HP Way. It's documented. Look at IBM. Respect others, best customer service, tasks are done in a superior way. Walmart. Respect the individual, service to customers, strive for excellence. What do you see in common? They're all the same. They're all exactly the same. Doesn't that say something to you about they've thought about this, worked. These are some of the most successful companies in the world. They've thought about it, worked at it, had infinite meetings about this stuff, and they've all come down to the same values that drive who it is they are. So, oops, I think I went one too far. No, I didn't. So basically, the common values that these companies have are these three. So why don't you just go home back to your little businesses that you're starting, just copy what the pros have spent millions of dollars and decades developing? Wouldn't that be the simplest thing to do? Why spend the time to develop your own set of values, objectives, culture? Just Xerox this. It's the easiest thing. Well, I think the issue is this same issue that you have with strategy and execution. They always say that every strategy that's out there in the world can be read about. I mean, it becomes part of the public domain immediately. So everybody knows everybody's strategy. The priceless thing, the thing that cannot be replicated, though, is the quality of execution. It all comes down to execution. So if you we'll just take the Walmart example here quickly to give you a feel for how Sam Walton did this. So Sam came up with his associates with 10 rules. Now, these aren't worth copying down. It's just more illustrative. Where you see, he figured out these are the 10 rules. If you want to be part of the Walmart culture and have these values, he's now operationalizing these, which are very homely kind of, we learned these at our mother's knee. We don't need Sam Walton to tell us these. Then he reinforces the culture with a sundown rule. Sundown rule says, by the end of the day, every question gets answered. So from a customer or an associate, we answer every question. The Walmart cheer, when we get together, we do W, W, A, L, L, squiggly, squiggly. And adults get together and do the Walmart cheer. Why in the world? Well, that is reinforcing these values of community and people matter. The 10-foot rule. Basically, if you come within 10 feet of a customer, you go up and ask them how you can help. So anytime you make eye contact with them and you go up and ask how you can help. Everyday low prices, that means you fly coach, you stay in a motel room with another Walmart executive, you save money that you can pass on to customers. That's what everyday low prices is. Right? And the fifth thing he does is these Saturday morning get-togethers where Bono comes and does rock concerts and CEOs come and the vice president shows up. I mean, these are huge corporate celebrations of being part of Walmart. So this reinforcing the culture is way more important than the three values. It's the execution around it that builds the culture. It's fun stuff. What makes it fun to be there? So the map, is this simple map, just getting alignment between these things. Alignment builds high trust. High trust is a currency that will save your bacon as an entrepreneur. It will help you in so many ways. When you cannot see through the fog, you don't know how you're going to meet the next payroll. You don't know how you're going to service the debt. You don't know how you're going to get that shipment out. You don't know how you're going to get rid of the inventory that you got too much of. High trust, if you've built these kinds of cultures of high trust, it'll see you through a lot of down cycles. So, I want you now to pick any organization that you're in, probably the one that's your the business that you're founding or working in that's a small business. But ask these 10 questions of yourself and be honest. You know, you don't need to, I'm not going to collect these. You're not going to show them to anybody. You're just going to look at these 10 things and evaluate this enterprise based on that, and then assess whether or not I'll tell you at the end. You're going to be assessing it 1 through 10. 10 is always true, reliably true. 1 or 0 is this is never the case. It's always violated. And somewhere in between is I can't count on it. It is sometimes true, sometimes not. Pick any number in between and then give yourself a score. So pick a business, school, your own family, church, any other organization, and we're going to rate it along these 10 dimensions here. So here are the 10 questions. The first one is, there are the 10 questions. First one is the integrity of the leader. So this is where you ask yourself, is the person who's running this business, is their personal, do they have integrity in their personal life? I've known a lot of people who, they may not cheat in the business, but you know they're doing things that are dishonest in their personal lives. They're taking advantage of people, friends or family or whatever. There's no division in their character between their private and their personal life. So think about you, if you're the leader of it, how would your employees or hoped to be hired employees evaluate you on this? Would they see you as having complete integrity, personal and private? Give yourself a score. Is there mutual respect among team players, the various people that are there? Are individuals more important than policy, bureaucracy? How do the interactions with the powerless go on in your organization? In other words, how do you treat the people who have no ability to make your business go one way or the other? I always used to look, when I went into an enterprise and I'm evaluating whether or not to invest, how do they treat the receptionist? How do they treat the person who cleans up the office afterwards? If they treat the powerless, the people who really can, in a certain way, you can anticipate that there'll be fairly high trust. If they treat them as dirt, ignore them or whatever, trust levels are generally lower. And then finally, do they bash people, either inside or out the organization? Talk about, it was an airline story, listening to, actually I've got several. I picked the most carefully selected one, where they talked about the passengers, well, we've got all the cattle are on now. You know, it's time to feed the cows or feed the cattle. You know, and you think that doesn't replicate itself with all the flight attendants and the folk, you know. So how do you respect people inside the organization, outside the organization, north, south, east, and west? And if there's high degree of respect for all, and you'll notice that's one of the ones that IBM, Walmart, and HP had, is respecting individuals. The third one is, do you empower people to help them to achieve their very best, or are you about keeping them from doing their worst? These policy manuals, these paraphernalia or paranoia, you know, where you're just watching it, making sure nobody takes advantage of you. I've been in organizations where it's all about rules and making sure you don't do your worst, versus the ones where they're just celebrating, liberating you to do your best. The fourth one is, have you aligned authority and responsibility and accountability, so that if somebody is responsible for something, they've got the authority to get it done and they have accountability. They get feedback on it. A lot of times you'll see this divided up in low trust organizations. You'll assign one person to do it, you'll measure it someplace else, you'll give somebody else the authority to do it. Those are almost always low trust organizations. So you have those lined up across the board. The fifth one is has to do with your mission statement. Most organizations have gotten tired of doing vision statements or mission statements. Why? Because they feel like they could have been written and published. You know, you could grab them out of a book. The only thing that's valuable about them is the process of creating it, is getting people together and saying, well, what are we about? What is our big dream? What would we like to achieve? What do we want? And so it has to be developed by the team, and it really has to be inspirational to people. Otherwise, people become cynical around it. If it's just one that you've created or that's existed for a long time or that you've copied out of the Walmart book, there will be cynicism and low trust that comes along with it. The sixth one has to do with communications. Do you tell the truth? And telling the truth, do you do it soon? Do you do it completely? And do you tell the truth about bad news as well as good news? A lot of entrepreneurial organizations, especially, I've noticed, tend to tell good news. And it's a little bit like the Wikia guy was talking about, celebrate, make yourself bigger, puff your chest out, make people believe you're more. You have to be very careful with that because people are smart. They figure it out, and if they feel like you're blowing smoke all the time, the trust levels go down. You may think you're pumping them up, but it gets less and less, and you have to pump the harder all the time. So do you communicate clearly, frequently, and broadly? Does the organization require sacrifice? We love what we sacrifice for. Now that may really seem strange, but think about, you were in the military, Kurt. You have great memories there because you had big sacrifice. I have great memories about Harvard Business School, which is a miserable place. This is on tape. Oh, rats. We got to cut that part out. I would say that let me just say it this way. Part of the first year was not the happiest thing, but I sacrificed. I stayed up all night. I worked on stuff. I look back on it, and it's some of my best memories. I had a friend one time that said, man, what I want to have is a little boy. I just cannot wait till I'm a father and have a little boy. And he had a little boy, and he thought, well, this isn't so great. This is a mewling, puking little guy. This is not the greatest thing after all. And then his wife got sick. And she was so ill she could not take care of this little baby. And so he found himself getting up in the middle of the night, walking this child, feeding it formula, changing its pants. And by the end of the week, he was so in love and so cared so much about that little baby because he'd sacrificed for it. And I know that's a funny example to give to a bunch of entrepreneurs, but you love the companies that you found. You love the people in the trenches with you. It really matters to you. So don't be afraid of sacrifice. If you want a high-trust organization, ask people to sacrifice for it. The trust levels will go up. And the leaders can't keep peace in that kind of organization by placating the powerful. Everybody has to sacrifice. The most powerful as well as the least powerful have to sacrifice. This is the one. So I've taught this to YPOers. And this is the one where I've gotten pushback. And I'd say it's about 75% of them push back on this one. And I argue with them on it because I think high-trust organizations share their budgets. I think people know them anyway. They figure it out. People are really smart. And so my view is talk to them about the budget. Let them know what's going on. Share with them and people start to solve problems. They buy in, they understand what your values are, and you start to get real alignment in the organization. But I've had a lot of people push back on that one, so you may not buy that one, but that's my view. Conflict. What's the level of conflict in the organization? Is it allowed? Is it celebrated? Organizations that don't have conflict include hospitals, prisons. There's a lot of places where there's no conflict, and there's a kind of a quiet that is an unreal quiet. I think you want organizations to celebrate dispute, to openly conflict, to have it be something that you can really talk about, and it's a good thing. I used to have a partner that after every presentation, he would say, I want your criticism. And if you said, well, that was really terrific, he said, no, I don't want to know that. I want to know what could I have done better. And he really sought it out, and you saw him make changes when he did that. So I think that's really what you want, is you want the kind of conflict and directness, and trust levels tend to rise if you have that, surprisingly. And then the final one is high-trust organizations have a level of humility about them. Every organization is like a cork on the sea. If you think about it, every once in a while people get feeling... I've been parts of pretty big organizations who have felt really powerful. I led the largest private real estate company in the world, and we were feeling pretty powerful and pretty smart and some days pretty good looking. And you start getting that feeling, and then you really realize in our business, it's all credit driven. It's all, you're leveraged. Interest rates can change on you. I mean, occupancy rates can go down pretty quickly, and all of a sudden you can be wiped out. And that is true of just about any business. It would not take much to wipe out most businesses. And we've seen it happen with some of the bigger businesses. In fact, if you look at the 100 businesses that were around 100 years ago, I think there are 3 that are left in the top 100. I mean, so huge enterprises have gone out of business that seem very powerful. So there needs to be a level of humility. And so I think that organizations that talk about their vulnerabilities, about their weaknesses, who share them, develop a reality check and a trust level with each other that is really likely to see them through tough times. Those who sugarcoat everything, I think, develop a cynicism, again, because of this idea that people are smart. So, net, developing a culture, you have your best shot at doing it. In a sense, if you think about it, when you're the only person there, you are the culture. Your first hire can improve on that culture or dilute that culture, but that first hire will change the culture. And then it's really a question almost of gravity. You know, as you add bodies, you know, the culture gets moved by the gravity of what is the most common set of beliefs and values, which is one of the reasons it's really important to talk about them, to have them out in the open and to hire based on values, because people will not compromise values. They'll compromise tactics, they'll compromise strategy, they'll compromise to a degree their objectives, but by the time you get to values, people are really, these are deeply entrenched kinds of views that we hold. So hire for values and fire for lack of coincidence of values. So we've got about 7 or 8 minutes here. That was much longer in terms of presentation than I wanted to be. I wanted to just kind of take that through to get a framework for you. But let's talk now about your thoughts or questions or comments. Yeah.
When you say hire for values, how? Like, what process do you put in place to ensure that?
Well, you know, I think if you go back to this idea of in thinking about, I think it starts out with knowing your own values. You know, what do you really care about? And I think if you go back, I think if I could follow you around for a week, I could tell you what your values are, because of this notion of time, money, and mind share. Now, you may say that there's something else, and so there'd be an integrity gap. And I'm not picking on you, saying that there's an integrity gap. I'm just saying with all of us, we say one thing. I mean, I have a really nice ideal set of values, but then you watch what I do, and I watch a little TV, and I relax, and then I eat more chocolate than I really should. So chocolate is an important value to me. Relaxation is an important value to me. I like fast cars, so I spend more money on fast cars than I should. I mean, so these are really my values. So I have all these things that I like to say over here, but somewhere in my value system is this other thing. You know, one of the ways that I learned this most painfully was I asked my kids one time to say, what does Dad say and what does Dad do? And so they listed all these things that I say all the time, you know, work hard, you know, don't sleep in, you know, brush your teeth, you know, all the things that parents say to children. Now, what do you see Dad do? Thinking that it would be, well, he really works hard and he brushes his teeth and he's really this good guy. And then, so they listed down all these things, and I remember the last one on my 6-year-old child's list was, you eat Slim Fast and M&Ms. You hypocrite. You know? I mean, she had picked up from what I do, watching me, that, you know, I wasn't totally consistent. You know? And so I think you really pay a whole lot of attention, figuring out first who you are, and then you start thinking about people that share those values. And I don't think values are necessarily around your own personal characteristics in a business as much as they are around business values. I think, to me, the most powerful business values are growth. Growth is a value. Do you really care about growing? Because growing means that you are able to produce a product that the marketplace sees as having greater value to them than it costs them. If you can produce something that people say, this is worth more to me than it costs me, you're going to grow. I promise you that is a recipe for growth. So growth is one of these business values. So I like people who really want to grow, who get excited by growing, by taking products to the marketplace, by selling, whatever. Profits, to me, is a business value. Because profits, to me, says, I don't get to set the price on what it is I'm selling. The marketplace will set the price. I don't get to do that. All I can do is manage my costs. And the difference between the price I set and my costs is my profit. So what that says is I'm efficient. If I can really be efficient, so I like hiring people who care about making profits because that says they've figured out how to be efficient, how to do more for less. They care about saving money, doing things in a quick, efficient way. So to me, profits and growth are business values. So they're not what people would expect. And then finally, to me, the most powerful one of all is this respect for other human beings. I think that will carry you so far in building a business. And I think it is seen in how you treat every single person with whom you have an interaction. And I can pick that up so quickly walking around with people, just watching how they transact their lives. And so to me, those are really the three powerful business values. But it'll be different for various of you. As you really think through who you are, how do you think business works? What really motivates you all day long as you run your business? To me, it's, can we sell this thing really well because it's providing a great need and great value for our customers? Can we produce it efficiently, effectively, at a low cost? And are people happy? Are we treating people well? So this is a great place. Would we make a difference in their life? If we weren't there, would that make a difference to our employees? Or would they just say, well, I'll go work somewhere else? I want to be in businesses where the employees say, man, this is a huge loss not to have this company in place. I think that's maybe how you measure that. So I've just shared with you what mine are, but figure out your own and then hire people who get excited about those same things, I think. Yeah?
Earlier you talked an anecdote about a time when you realized the values of your company had changed from being growth-focused to being profit-focused. Is there a time in the lifespan of a company when that's likely to happen, the stage of the company's life when that's likely to happen, and when that happens, are you to assume that everything else, your objective, strategy, tactics, controls are going to radically shift?
They need to. I mean, you need to think about all of them. I know when I was trying to shift from a balance sheet company to an income statement company, or at least add an income statement to the balance sheet, I realized that we were paying our young partners to build more space. And the only way they made money was if they started a new project. And so we were saying, hey, we want you to stop building all these new projects. The market won't absorb them. Stop it. And yet, they were making $18,000 a year in salary, taking a draw against development profits. The only way they could survive was by starting that new space. So we didn't change the compensation structure as we were saying, this is what we believe in, this is what the market is telling us. The lack of synchronizing those two meant that it failed. Trust levels went down, it ended up in litigation. It was just impossible to manage it because you didn't have this alignment. So I think it has to, anytime you shift any of those things, you have to shift all of them. You have to make sure that they stay in alignment. We've got another minute. Yeah.
But what you've just described is a reflection of the industries that you were in. And due to being in real estate, it was all about growth. And then managing your cost in the airline businesses, that's how you make your margins of profit.
Right.
So it's nothing innovative that you've created in values to change that. Could it be changed? I mean, if you look at other industries that are progressive and moving on to new frontiers, can they follow that particular model in new development?
Yeah, I mean, it may be that you've got to do it. I would think things like innovation, being cutting edge, testing the market, piloting things. I mean, there's a lot of things like that. I've tended not to be in those businesses. I have tended to back people who are in those and hope that they'll do that. But you're absolutely right. So these aren't necessarily the values. I'm kind of an old line manufacturing, service, retailing, big industry guy. And so I do entrepreneurial activity in those sorts of things where those are appropriate values. But they're probably not in a lot of the things that you guys are doing. That's a great comment. Thank you. One last question, and then we'll.
Session goes till 2:30.
Oh, I thought it went to 2:15. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that right? Okay. Well, let's keep talking. Anybody who wants to peel on out of here, don't feel like you're trapped here. Steve?
So, what suggestions do you have for somebody wanting to say they've done the assessment and the culture isn't what they want, people aren't having fun? Can you change the culture? What are the tips to changing it?
Yeah, I think culture change starts with yourself. If you're the leader of an organization, I noticed when I was running various divisions that if I had a division where the guy who was running it was overweight, people tended to be overweight. Or if he was a heavy smoker, people tended to smoke. Or if he was a fighter pilot, tended to hire fighter pilots. I mean, so I think a lot of it is figuring out who you are and making yourself the best you can be. Then I think this very difficult thing of letting people go who do not fit with the values. That is the toughest thing to do. But I think you've got to make personnel change. It's very tough to get people to adjust their value. If they really are not wired the way you're going, they will fight you the whole way. So I think you've got to be willing to do that. The other thing I think you have to do is talk about it. You just have to open it up and say, let's talk about what we're really about. What do we want? What are our dreams? What would winning be for us? These are all good questions. Yeah.
I don't have so much a question, but I would maybe just share an anecdote.
Please.
That probably sort of underscores one of the points you raised about the hiring and firing. And I feel like my company we've grown from like 2 to 86 people, and obviously about the first 2 years we had almost no one that left. And then since then there's been more turnover, but the firing decision sort of there's more graceful ways of getting someone to leave, but are the hardest. And I think there's pitfalls. Like if you don't take action, you sort of have weird things happen. So we recently hired somebody that came from Netflix, and they always talk about how great a company Netflix is. And they showed me that the Netflix company policies, they don't have a vacation policy plan. You just take vacation time whenever you think it's right. But there's obviously a culture there that prevents people from not working. People are still coming to work. And I'm thinking, I can't believe that. That just seems unfathomable when I think about the employee I had, came in late, left early, went out, smoked a cigar, got everything done late, but eventually had the fire. And we realized, well, my mistake was not firing them. Like, so if you let that kind of, if you keep that person around, you then tend to think, I can't trust people to come to work on time and get things done, which is poisoning your way of managing everybody else.
Yeah, then you change your culture for the lowest common denominator.
Right.
And what that does is alienate all of the people who would buy into the greater culture. And that's why you have to, companies that build up deadwood, and that's the most common thing that happens is a company gets to a certain size, they just say, well, let's transfer him over to accounts receivable or whatever, and you start building up pockets of deadwood in the company rather than doing, and then you have to have a policy manual that says, okay, this is how we handle this, and then pretty soon people start to violate that, and you have to add more rules, and then you have these you get like the IRS code, which is that thick and requires lawyers to interpret it, and you have conflict and whatever. Whereas it's much easier, and the earlier you address it, the better. And you really need a whole lot fewer manuals. Kurt?
Actually, in our business plan, we have a section on culture, and sort of try to intelligently design that culture. So I'm sort of asking a question here. And we can approach it. You sort of start with values. So we kind of started with, what's the environment? What does everybody want to accomplish in that environment? And then what are the values that that organization needs to accomplish the mission in that environment? And so it started a little bit broader. I don't know if you think that's a good strategy or not.
I do. I mean,
That connection between those three elements is key to really environment. I'm not saying we've got to find it, but that's what we. And my understanding that came from, you mentioned sort of the military, there's a very strong culture in the common aviation segment that was very good at what it did. That culture would not be necessarily my business. Parts of it would, parts of it wouldn't.
right.
But the key to being successful was understanding what's the environment, right, what's the mission, and then getting that organizational culture.
Yeah, I think having this map and getting alignment between these is really critical. But where do you start is not so important. What I've found when I've gone into enterprises, the easiest place for me to start is right here with the objective. What are we trying to achieve? Because you can ask people, what does winning look like? What would it feel like to win? And describe it. Put some flesh on those bones. You know how the athletes, when they talk about jumping over a high bar or something, they envision themselves running down the track, leaping up over the bar, and clearing the bar. And so if that's what success is, envision it. Now describe it. Use words to describe it. And let's really get some flesh on those bones. Now let's tie into what are the values that would support that, which is something that is an underpinning, that's a higher level. There's probably fewer of them that support that than anything else. But I think, so to me, as I go into organizations and try to help them get to a better place, I always start with the objective. I think that is the easiest place if you're intervening, or if you're a CEO and you're worried about your culture. I think the best place to start is with the objective. But don't forget to get back to values, and don't forget to get all the way down to a dashboard. I mean, in the end, great businesses have great dashboards. They really have figured out, what are the half a dozen to 10 dials that you've got to watch. And the ones that don't do a good job are always looking at historical dials. What happened in the past? They're measuring the beans that have been counted. The really great ones have some dials that look back there and say, well, where have we been? They have some dials that are looking at a sales pipeline. They have some dials that are 2 or 3 steps removed from what you think you need to manage, but you know that that's a key driver in the business. So you got to get all the way through the whole thing. You've got to make sure you get the dashboard built. And you've got to tie into values. And it's that whole process that allows you to build a great high-trust culture. Robert?
It strikes me that as I look at some of these values conflicts you listed, that some of them are going to be relatively easy for head of the organization to change, and others aren't.
Right.
And I'm wondering, the other thing that you said, which I think is true, is that you can list a bunch of values, but people will be cynical if the person at the top of the organization isn't living these values. You actually
destroy the culture if you do. If you don't have integrity around them,
right.
I mean, it's like a poison pill into the culture.
So it seems that there's a certain amount of the values of the company that are going to be determined just by that person at the top, and no amount of rolling around or starting with objectives is going to be able to change the values that culture is, as long as the person's in that role.
Boy, that is so true. I don't know if I've got this one slide anywhere here. Yeah, this is. So when I evaluate a business, these are the 4 buckets that I look at. So I'm now an investor in your business. The very businesses you're starting, I'm talking to people like you all day long, and I collect information in these 4 buckets. And so I look at, I probably start out with, well, what is the product or service that you're involved in? And I want to understand that. And then I want to understand it in the context of the marketplace. How big is the market? How fast is it growing? Who else is in the market? And what are they doing? What unfair advantages do I have in that? So I look hard at that. And then I want to structure a deal, a relationship, a financial arrangement with you that goes beyond that. It's maybe a control arrangement. It may be a help, advisement arrangement. But I want to structure something around that meets your needs and meets my needs and is consistent with those other 2. And then the last thing I'm really looking at is sort of evaluating the quality, the character, the values of the leader. Can this leader, does this leader embody values that are likely to build a great culture? And that may include things like, is this somebody who can see over the horizon? Is this somebody who is a celebrator of others' success? I mean, there's a whole bunch of factors that go into a successful leader. If they fail on that one, so what I always do is I say, in the end, I can have a B+ in those, but I've got to have an A. I have yet to do a successful deal where I've had a B in the leadership. And I've done a bunch of deals where it hasn't made a whole lot of sense. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done airline deals, because there's nothing about that industry that makes any sense at all. I mean, it's regulated, high fuel prices, labor unions, you got slotting, everything is wrong with the industry. And you have crazies in the business. You have people that love to push tin. And that's what they're about. I mean, it's the dumbest industry. It was Warren Buffett that said, the best thing would have happened was if Wilbur had shot Orville. That's the best thing for the airline business. So, and yet, I've been able to back people with high values, integrity, great leadership, adaptability, seeing over the horizon, and so it's worked out. So that, to me, is the key bucket. And you're right, it's very tough to build a culture. So if you don't have integrity, if you treat people poorly, if you're disorganized, if you have all these characteristics that are dysfunctional, you're going to have a tough time building a culture that will get past a certain point. Now, you may be able to bring people in who can fill in for you, but ultimately most of those have the wheels fall off at some time, with a few notable exceptions. Yeah.
Just real quick on this leadership side, have you been able to distill differences between someone who hires well and someone who hires poorly? I mean, they might be a great visionary and check all the boxes, but hiring is just brutally difficult.
It is.
And have you developed any kind of back of the envelope, set of metrics or just sense of hiring ability?
There's a couple of comments I'd make. The quick answer is no. I feel like if you get it right 2/3 of the time, you'll be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, it's really a tough thing to do. You can be fooled, as experienced as you can get. But I've learned not to hire myself, which is the most tempting thing. When you first start out in this, you hire yourself. Because you know yourself and you kind of like yourself. And you think, why wouldn't I want me? And that's almost always wrong. And then you don't hire resumes either. I used to hire resumes, and so I was hiring people that just had these stellar resumes. I do hire for people who've been successful, who've had a pattern of success. I find people who've been successful, and it may be that they were the star running back on the football team. I mean, it doesn't matter, It may not be related, but I found that people who win tend to like to continue to win. They just have this intense desire to get it done. So, and to me, hard work, the ability to work hard and to stay focused, to be intelligent, to have high integrity. And so I ask a series of questions. I ask a lot of open-ended questions. I don't like these case, if any of you have done interviewed for consulting firms, they'll give you a little problem and say, how would you solve that? Would you unplug the fridge or do the light bulb or whatever? I think those are just almost beyond silly for what I'm looking for in any event. So, no, I don't know a formula, but I've gotten better. I still follow it up pretty regularly, but I'm better at it today than I was. Yeah?
Thinking just over the past, you mentioned that over the past 100 years, only 3 major corporations are still around. Just focus that in on just, say, the last 10 or 15 years. Which ones do you think are the most notorious that can ascribe their failure to this, either a loss of culture or basically a flaw in their culture from the very get-go that eventually came to cause their early demise?
Well, I'll tell you the one that I know the best, and that is the Trammell Crocombe. Yeah, I mean, there are clearly ones that had violations but they had violations of culture before they had violations of regulations. I mean, it was very clear that the Enron culture was a sick culture way before they ran into trouble. But the one that I know the best is the Trammell Crow Company, which is the largest private real estate company in the world. And we were the envy of every other real estate company. And because we were a balance sheet, grow fast company, all of our partners were multimillionaires, and they started to believe the press. They started to feel like, we're rich guys and we're pretty good looking and we can just kind of do whatever we want. We're bulletproof. And we don't have to pay. So when I started looking at it, I realized that we were losing $22 million a year in current operations. We were making it up by developing new space, and we're kind of covering it up with borrowings. And if you just looked at cash, we were creating this big balance sheet, and it was buried. I mean, the $22 million we were losing in current operations was buried by hundreds of millions made in the equities on our properties. So, but it was very tough to get that organization to say, wait a darn minute. Everything that we do all day long, every day, is losing money. It's only if we can build into this rapid environment that we survive. We could not stop that. I mean, it was just, so that, to me, that's the tragedy I know most personally. But I think there are the ones that have run into regulatory problems that are tragedies. But, I mean, look at General Motors. I mean, read Alfred P. Sloan's My Years with General Motors. If you want to read a brilliant business book by a fabulous engineer, he built General Motors as an engineer, as a technician. He went in and took that thing apart and put it back together, figured out market segmentation, figured out how you get somebody from a Chevy to an Oldsmobile to a Buick to a Cadillac and became a lifelong customer. I mean, it's a brilliantly put together thing. And then look what's happened to General Motors over the last 35 years. It is, I don't know how it survives. Seriously. I mean, it's clearly in the bureaucracy, aristocracy stage. And if you look at unfunded liabilities, I mean, I think you have to, if you're a doctor, you say this patient is on its deathbed. So there's one. All right, well, thank you very much. I wish you all the best.